Welcome to Session 8 of the Sheltered Instruction Training. In this session, we're going to continue to look at the fourth component of SIOP, strategies. We're going to look at various strategies to see what they look like. The first strategy is called Anticipation Reaction Guide. In this strategy, you create true-false, agree-disagree questions. Students will predict and answer the questions before and after the reading. Let students explain their answers and discuss how some of the responses may be changed. Let's look at what it actually looks like.
Welcome to Route 21. Beth Alson here to explain Standard 4, Making Content Meaningful. Do you struggle with getting your students to read prior to class? Then use this simple strategy, an anticipation reaction guide. It's actually an advanced reading organizer used to create a sense of anticipation to help the student connect prior knowledge to new knowledge. Before reading, the student checks what they know about the following statements provided and simply just marks true, false, or not sure. In this case, the student was unsure. Then, after reading, the student reviews their statements and their answers. In the notes area, they explain whether or not their answer was correct and why. For example, the student found on page 31 that their response should have been true. They can even then expand upon it and explain it in their own words. This will make the connection from what they already know to the new knowledge even stronger. Finally, after the students have completed their guides, have them share out in the first 5 minutes of the next class period. That way they can review and verify their responses. Again, this is just a simple, quick strategy to support reading comprehension using an anticipation reaction guide.
The next strategy is called Directed Reading Thinking Activity, DRTA. This is a guided reading with periodic pauses to make and discuss predictions. Let's see what it looks like.
The Directed Reading Thinking Activity, DRTA, provides a scaffold for English reading by modeling how experienced readers make predictions as they read. Using DRTA, an instructor asks questions throughout a story, guiding students to make predictions and to monitor these predictions as subsequent text is provided. The teacher asks more questions at the beginning of the activity, and students are later encouraged to generate their own. The end result is increased reader comprehension and engagement in the text. DRTA can be used with both narrative and expository text. Our demonstration will focus on expository text. Because these texts usually contain headings and subheadings, it can be easier to determine when to ask key questions. To introduce DRTA to a class, first model the procedure with a short reading. Next, ask students how to create questions using headings and subheadings. Then divide students into groups and have them create and answer some key questions. Groups should contain students with varied language abilities. Finally, students should report to the class and compare their answers. Eventually, students should be able to use their techniques independently. Here's a brief demonstration of how an instructor can introduce the directed reading thinking activity to the class. The teacher activates student background knowledge, gets students to make predictions based on headings, and prepares them to monitor their understanding of the text.
Today we're going to read an interesting article about the history of soap. What do you think we'll find in the article?
Maybe find different kinds of soap?
Like bubbles and watering?
Kinds of soap?
Okay. Well, one of the headings you'll notice says, cleaning before soap. How do you think people got clean before soap?
They probably jumped in the lake or the river.
They didn't get very clean.
They smelled.
Well, another heading says, life without soap. What do you think life would be like without soap?
Joey would smell.
We'd all smell.
Well, when you read the article, see if your guesses about soap and about the article match your own, what the article says, and see if they're right. Remember, if you're guessing, you'll have the best chance of figuring out what the article says, and that's even if your guesses aren't always right.
The directed reading thinking activity combines aspects of pre-reading activities
and questioning procedures to assist students' comprehension. It can be especially useful in aiding English learners to understand a complicated text. Information for this presentation was obtained from the book Reading, Writing, and Learning in ESL by Suzanne Paraguay and Owen Boyd.
The third strategy is question-answer relationships, QAR. Ask questions with answers that can be found either in the book or in the student's head. The questions can have obvious answers, or they can require searching and applying to their own personal experiences.
This video is about question-answer relationships, or QAR. QAR is a comprehension strategy that can be used when students are struggling to answer questions about the text, when they do not support their answers with evidence from the text, or when their answers come from the extreme ends of the spectrum every time. Let's talk a little bit more about what question-answer relationships are. Taffy Raphael is well known for establishing this theory, and she states that QAR helps students categorize questions according to where and how they find the answer to the questions. The purpose of this strategy is to identify the types of questions asked and how to find the answers to better assist with comprehension. What kind of questions can be asked? The first main category is in the text. The answers to these questions can easily be found in the reading. Within this category, there are right there questions, which use words exactly from the questions and can usually be found in one sentence, and think and search questions. Most people know think and search questions as inferencing, which means using several parts of the text to read between the lines. Second category consists of in my head questions. These questions require more of the student's input. There are author and me questions, which require students to use their background knowledge and the text to answer the question, and on my own questions, which require students to apply their background knowledge to critically think about items beyond the text, but are related to ideas within it. Also need to have available a highlighter, a pencil, and maybe a pen. So, first thing you need to do is read that passage. Alright, after we've read our passage, it's time to use that QAR strategy. First, I'm going to look for any kind of questions that I could answer using just the text. So the right there questions and the think and search questions. So I know that this one, question 5, that will have to be an in my head question, because it asks what I think. And it's talking about something bigger than what I read in the text, and I can apply it to real life. So that means it's an on my own question. The rest of these can be found in the text. So, we'll start with what kinds of things are beneficial for organisms. Well, this one is a think and search question because it says the word beneficial, and then in the sentence above it says all organisms need water, food, and shelter to stay alive. So, I can write food, water, and shelter are beneficial. Okay? And that took 2 sentences to find. So that's a think and search question. Remember, think and search questions are ones you have to search for. It takes up more than 1 sentence. What kinds of things are detrimental for organisms? Well, it says right here, and we'll underline that in pencil, is that being without water, food, or shelter for very long is detrimental, which means it is harmful to organisms. It says it right there in the text that being without food, water, and shelter are detrimental. Then we'll answer the last one. You think hunting or relocation is a better solution for oversized animal populations. Why? So, I can't just write without thinking first. I'm going to flip it over and make a mind map. I think that relocation is better. Remember, a mind map is only one way to sort out these kind of questions. I would use my own thoughts in my head to come up with some ideas. And then, with my ideas, I would use those to write my sentence. So now that you have seen some examples, how is it that QAR works? Raphael mentions that it clarifies how students approach the task of reading text and answering questions. It shows students what kind of information to look for while reading and how to answer questions. For example, after practicing the entire strategy, students know that if a question has the word you in it, that is an in my head question. Thank you very much for your kind attention. I hope this video helps you help your students.
Split page note-taking. This is where students divide a piece of paper in half, and on one side, they write questions or preview a text or topic while reading. Students take notes and answer their questions on the right side of their paper.
Hello, and welcome to the fascinating world of split-page note-taking. My name is Kent Eaton, and I'm not only the creator of this PowerPoint presentation, but I will serve as the narrator as well. Sit back, relax, and prepare to be amazed as we learn more about this instructional routine to develop content literacy. One of many note-taking strategies available to students, the purpose of split-page note-taking is to write notes using headings and subheadings to structure the layout of the notes. Split-page note-taking has been around for over 60 years and is known today by many different names. It is believed that Walter Pauk, a professor at Cornell University, first created split-page note-taking as a way of helping his students better prepare themselves for tests. He called his method of note-taking Cornell Notes. I first learned of this style of note-taking 10 years ago when my school, the Pleasant Lee Middle School in Lee Summit, Missouri, was following the Reading Across the Disciplines, or the RAD strategies. We called this system of note-taking double column notes. Likewise, the CRMS Literacy Group calls it two-column notes, and the Reading Quest organization calls their system simply column notes. No matter what you call it, this matrix style of note-taking has been proven extremely beneficial to many students. The procedures of split-page note-taking can be summarized in 4 simple steps. Begin by writing the topic or title of the chapter across the top of the note page. Next, divide the page into 2 columns with 1/3 on the left and 2/3 on the right. Follow by writing major headings or questions in the left column. Finally, write more detailed information or answers to the questions in the right column. Let's take a look at what I mean. Take a close look at this sample template. Perhaps you've already noticed that those who teach this form of note-taking suggest you utilize every inch of available space, including the very top of the page, both the left and the right margins, as well as the entire bottom. Once again, notice the top space is reserved for such items as the name of the class, the topic, or the chapter title. Some might want to add additional information, such as the student's name, the date, or the page in the textbooks from where the information was taken. The smaller left-hand column is designated for major headings or questions. Likewise, the larger area in the right column is the space where one is to write the details associated with the headings or the questions. It may interest you to know that Cornell Notes suggest designating the space along the bottom 1 inch of the paper to write a summary of the notes. Double column notes, 2-column notes, and column notes pretty much use the same format that you see here for their system of note-taking. So, if your students have had little or no experience with split-page note-taking, how do you get started? Douglas Fisher says, as you would expect, teachers need to model the process of taking split-page notes and structure ample time for guided practice if students are to become proficient. Fisher also says that split-page note-taking is best utilized not before or after, but during reading time. He also states this strategy of note-taking aids in both comprehension and writing skills. Among the many benefits related to split-page note-taking, Fisher says this instructional routine benefits every student in developing content literacy in these ways. It is a logically organized format. It helps learners separate big ideas from supporting details, and it allows for inductive and deductive prompting.
The last strategy that we're going to talk about is called SQP2RS, or Squeepers. It stands for Survey, Question, Predict, Read, Respond, and Summarize. In this strategy, students use their background knowledge and apply it to a new text. Let's see what Squeepers looks like.
An activity that I think you'll find especially effective when you're teaching your students expository or informational text. It's called SQP2RS, which is impossible to remember, and so a group of kids, third graders, decided to name it Squeepers. What it is an instructional framework for teaching your students how to think like readers in informational and expository text. So let's look at the steps of Squeepers. The very first step is that your students will preview text, and I usually suggest no more than about a minute for a preview. Have them really focus for 1 minute on a survey or a preview. Be sure and do a think aloud and a model when you introduce previewing or surveying, because it's real important for students to know what to look for. Next, we're going to have students question, where they're going to, based upon their preview, list a few questions that they think that they'll find answers to by reading this text. The students will be working in groups to come up with their questions, and when I feel that they've had enough time to generate 2 or 3 questions about what they think they're going to learn when they read this text, I'm going to ask them, and we're going to post the questions on our chart. So I'll go to Group 1 and say, Group 1, what's one question you think we'll find answers to when we read this text? So let's pretend that Group 1 comes up with the question, where in the universe is the Earth found? Now when I have Group 1 give that question, as always happens in classes, a few other groups may have come up with a very similar question. So I'm going to say to the class, does anybody else have that question? And Group 2 says, yeah, we had that question, and I'm going to put a star on the chart. Group 3 says, we did too. Group 4, Group 5, then I'm going to put a star or an asterisk or a check mark to indicate that other groups also had that same question. Once you have the questions, then we want to narrow the focus even more. That's what students have such a difficult time with expository text. They think everything's important. They have a hard time figuring out what's truly important. That's why Squeepers is such a good technique to use with them. So based upon the questions and based upon those that have lots of asterisks or stars, we then will come up with only maybe 3 or 4 predictions of the most important information we're going to learn by reading this chapter. Now be careful here. Please resist the temptation to overly control this process of the students coming up with questions or figuring out what they think is most important. The reason I caution for that is that let the students figure this out. If they find that maybe they didn't ask the right questions or maybe they learned some other important information, that can be adjusted later in the Squeepers process during the response time. Once we've completed this process, then we'll move on to the reading. Now at this point, you may think, oh wow, that took a long time. Well, it probably took me longer to explain it than it actually takes to do it in the classroom. Try to aim for 5 to 7 minutes of instructional time. For the survey, that only takes a minute, for the generation of questions, and for the predictions. They then read the text either with a partner individually, small group, or with the teacher. You may have the students either choose the way that they're going to read, or of course you could assign it. The main thing you want students to do is finish reading at about the same time so you can pick up on the next step of the process. The next step is to have the students respond. They can respond to the questions that were generated earlier. They can modify the questions based upon what they've read so far. They may drop some questions because they're no longer relevant. Finally, we want our students to be able to all summarize what was read, either orally or in writing. They can summarize as partners. They can summarize in a group. It can be written on a chart. Or you may want students to do an oral summary by themselves to be able to ensure that you have individual accountability at this point. So in a nutshell, that's Squeepers. Now in my research on Squeepers, with 4th graders and with 10th graders, I found several things. First of all, I found that student engagement was great, much more engagement. Lots of students don't get real excited about reading their textbooks, but when they're working with their partners, where they're in the control of doing the reading, coming up with the questions, coming up with the predictions, they're much more engaged and more likely to learn the information.
This is the end of Session 8. Thank you.